highlighting this aspect of pandemic. We were, and you have rightly pointed out that it's more serious. It can be more serious than what we think right now. Now I'd like invite our second speaker, Professor Pankaj Jain. Professor Pankaj Jain is an internationally recognized academic leader in sustainability, Jain studies, film studies, and diaspora studies. He is a professor of philosophy and religious studies and is planning to launch and direct the India Center at Flame University. Recently, I think he has become director of India Center now, maybe 2 days ago. And earlier he was the founding co-chair of India Initiatives Group and associate professor in the departments of philosophy and religion and anthropology at the University of North Texas, an American university. I invite you to.
Thank you very much, Professor Sunaina Singh, India Foundation Director. It is really great fortune to be at such a pious land, which I was fortunate to be here about 6 months back and got a chance to visit this camp at that time also. This is not just the land of the great Buddha and the Mauryan Empire, Gupta Empire, also the great land where Mahavir, the 24th Tirthankar, got his enlightenment, his nirvana, not too far from here, Pavapuri. The first female acharya in the whole Jain history also resides here for last 5 decades, called Virayatan. I urge all of you to also make sure to visit the Wensang monument, one of the first earliest backpackers of the world who walked for 10,000 miles and came here and was crying as he could go to Bodhi Vriksha. You know the whole incident. The monument is not so well known, so I urge everybody to also make a trip to that if you get a chance. Topic is very relevant, and I want to show my PowerPoint if I can. The title of my talk is Dharma and Adharma during the pandemic. If you can show my PowerPoint, please. When we talk of dharma in the pandemic, right, I think one of the first things that we have to remind ourselves is how we responded to this pandemic. Even as the pandemic was hitting us and still hitting us in some parts of our country, we were sending our vaccines across the world. If we compare the ratio of domestic consumption and export, we are at the first 3 countries in the world that continue to export our vaccines even as we are fighting with the pandemic throughout the last couple of years. Another major, if we contrast this with adharma, what can be adharma during the pandemic? Adharma would be when so-called rich and developed countries are flush with 5-6 times more vaccines than they need in their for the domestic use, and yet they were not willing to share their vaccines. That could be one example of adharma during the pandemic. When you don't share your own resources, you don't need those resources, but you are still you're sticking with those resources, not sharing. That could be one example of adharma. But adharma is not recent, especially during the pandemic. We have been victims, our country, our civilization has been victim of adharma during the pandemic, even earlier also. But before I switch to that, I would like to share what is our contribution or dharmic contribution to pandemic. We have been talking about vaccines for last 2 years, every circle, but we also must remind ourselves that the very first vaccine probably that was invented or discovered was also most likely, we don't have final proof, but according to latest academic research publications, at least around 10th century CE, our country was already using some kinds of vaccines, and most likely with the travel of Buddhism from Dhamma from India to China, most likely that technology also reached China, and then in 18th century, as the British Empire grew, that technology was, I guess, taken away or even stolen by the British, and that Tika became the vaccine, and then it was forced back on us. And even as the native Tika was banned, as Professor Dharampal, the noted Gandhian historian, has shown in his research, the Tika was banned and vaccine was imposed on us. And of course, like in most things that happened during the colonial era, that is a sad legacy of adharma during the pandemic. couple of more examples of adharma during the pandemic, if I may share, is that as the bubonic plague was hitting us, our national leaders were very conscious of the civil liberties that were taken away by the British Raj. So Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak protested this, and as British did, he was put in Mandle jail for 18 months. When Chaperkar brothers protested that arrest of Lokmanya Tilak, they were sentenced to death. Now these kind of things have been noted in some films also. So, pandemic and dharma, and then I'm bringing another angle of film, which has not yet been discussed so far, except the film Inception that our Korean guest scholar just shared with us. Other great contribution by our medical dharmic people is great example is of Dr. Kotnis, that was invited by China to take care of the Chinese soldiers after Sino-Japanese war. Not exactly pandemic, but the great tradition of helping others is so ingrained in us that we should also, I think, remember Dr. Kotnis. At the age of 28, he was in China. He goes and he sacrifices his life. And the great, like in the morning, it was mentioned that Nepal and Bhutan are our great friendly cousins. I think China is also our civilization cousin. For some reason, we are not as friendly with them, but our connections go so far back in at least 2 millennia, more than 2 millennia. And Dr. Kotnis was, I think, a great shining example of that friendship. What else? I had so many things to share that my PowerPoint is not even available. I don't know what the tech team is doing, but I have a backup here, so I'll share from here now, even though I cannot show you the PPT. It's coming up, okay. All right. Yes, other couple of films that I would like to share with Dr. Kotnis is 22 June 1897. In this, that the film portrays the great sacrifice of Tilak and Chaperkar brothers. The film History of India starts with a black and white film, a silent film, which portrays a missionary trying to convert in a South Indian village using pandemic as a tool. So even as the pandemic is raging in the South Indian village, a Catholic priest is converting the native villagers of that South Indian village. So that is another angle to pandemic and what could be pitfalls of pandemic. Other film that is inspired by Sharat Chand Chatterjee's novel was now named as Khushbu by the great filmmaker Gulzar, in which again we see this great dharmic. Next please. We already covered this topic, this slide. And how a doctor is sacrificing his life and his career to cure the villagers. That's another positive side or dharmic side of pandemic. Next please. Next. This I already covered, yes. So 18th century variolation that became the vaccine in Europe, and that was forced back to India and Tika was banned. I covered that. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. Tika ban I mentioned already. Atrocities done by the British. 10 million death during the third plague pandemic I covered already also. Thank you. Next, please. These are the 4 films I already also covered. Next. All right. Now we come to the dharma of pandemic. So as we have already seen these words shared by many scholars on this dais, what are the 3 great traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism are mentioned adequately in this conferences, but Jainism is also a minority religion, minority tradition of India that has sustained itself for last more than 3 millennia. Hinduism's contribution, of course, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we have heard so many times. Buddhism's contribution, Karuna, or the teaching, has been mentioned many times. Jainism's key idea is Parasparo Graho Jivanam, that all beings in the universe, they live by cooperating and helping each other. That's also one of the key ideas that should be mentioned. Next, please. Other ideas that we can probably take from the Bhagavad Gita is Indriyartheshu Vairagyam Manahankara Evacha Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Indu Dukha Doshanu Darshanam, 13th chapter, verse 9. That Janma, Mrityu, Jara and Vyadhi should be reflected upon every day, every moment probably, that we are all here in a very temporary sense, and we have to take care of our own life and we have to take care of others' life also. This pandemic is also, I think, giving us an idea that what are we doing as a civilization? Do we want more concrete jungles, or do we want more natural jungles? That's a great, I think, halting point when we are all stuck in lockouts, in our lockdowns, and in our homes and wherever we are in the world. I think it's a great time to spend more time on reflecting on these questions. Our leaders must become change agents. Previous slide, please, still. Our leaders cannot accept, and we cannot accept status quo as given. We have to be change agents, especially, and starting with our leadership. Another great idea that if we can take a lesson from pandemic is to experience this shunya, the Buddhist idea of shunyata, and of course in other dharmic traditions also, that as we are doing nothing, we have to also realize that we are nothing, right? At the end of the transcendental wisdom of especially in Buddhism, that we are nothing but this cosmic universal emptiness, shunyata, that we are part of. That's what the Dhamma tradition teaches us. The pandemic also gives us a time to pause and go back and retrain ourselves. And in that moment, I think Vedic tradition brings great contributions of 64 kalas are to be learned by us. Probably we have not learned even more than one or two, probably most of us, at least I have not. And so time for us to see what we have been missing in the traditional education. 64 kalas we have missed probably, and 14 vidyas. So this time when we are contemplating on shunyata, and when we are inside our homes, probably this time to rethink and upskill our learning, that is also a kind of a blessing in disguise from this pandemic. Next slide, please. Then quoting a Jain text, which was shown in, media had covered this example, that 2400 years ago, Ogh Niryukti Grantha had already described the protocols during the pandemic. What kind of quarantine procedures should be mentioned, should be practiced, were all described in one of the Jain texts that is 2400 years ago. That also I would like to share. Then the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. These are the three recent academic publications. Ram Madhavji was hinting at us that we should, all researchers and scholars should pause and take the latest ideas and connect with dharmic traditions. These are the three examples, not by me, but three other scholars have done this, that the three yogas, the Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Karma Yoga, how they can contribute to mental health has been now covered and published in Indian Journal of Psychiatry 2020. The professor, I believe, is at Harvard. European Heart Journal published a very interesting article. What are our contemporary medical practitioners, how they are helping us? They are in the dilemma of Arjuna. They have to, on the one hand, they have to take care of their own personal health. On the other hand, they have to take care of the societal health. So they are in that dilemma. I think Bhagavad Gita can guide them, as they have to sacrifice sometimes, in many cases, they have to sacrifice they have to risk their own health and to help others. That practice has been compared with Arjuna in this article in European Heart Journal in 2020. Then another interesting journal article from Journal of Religion and Health says that Bhagavad Gita can teach 4 Ds for all of us, especially during the pandemic. The D of detachment, D of duty, D of doership, and D of dhyana. These 4 Ds are very great reminders coming from the Bhagavad Gita, especially in these times of pandemic. Now moving on, I would like to share some of my own research in which I connected dharmic traditions with, not with pandemic so much, but with environmental ethics. Not human rights, but environmental ethics I did cover in 10 years back when I published my first book, in which I'm quoting these 2 references from 2 scholars, Pramod Parajuli, originally from Nepal, but currently in the US, and Waitman and Pandey. Waitman and Pandey were the Hindi teachers in England, I believe, as I remember correctly. In 1978, they did an ethnographic survey of the word dharma. What they found is that Indians of all languages, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, almost all languages of India have this word dharma. And they use this word dharma not just for religion, of course, religion is a subset of dharma, but they also use the word dharma for duty, and also they use for physical properties. As we heard, Agni has its own dharma, Vriksha has its own dharma. So dharma not just in Sanskritic text or Brahmanical text, that pejorative term that has been used by colonial scholars, but even contemporary Indians of all languages have been using this dharma for multiple dimensions, multiple meanings. Something similar was posited by Pramod Parajuli in his writing. He said that dharma is at the intersection of supernatural realm natural realm, and human realm. Human realm connects with ethics, supernatural realm connects with spirituality, and natural realm connects with the environmentalism or environmental features. So by these two very interesting intersections of the meanings of dharma are the multiple dimensions of dharma that we have heard many times from Vedic texts and Upanishadic texts, but these are the two contemporary researches that also greatly point at us that dharma is not just religion, dharma is not just ethics, dharma is multiplicity of these meanings. And in my own research, I went to 3 communities across Western India. The Bishnoi community that we heard when they caught Salman Khan there, and Salman Khan is still fighting that court case. But what I found is Salman Khan was just one example. It became a celebrated example of environmentalism. But Bishnois have been fighting this battle to save their natural fauna and flora for millennia, for centuries, for 500 years. Similarly, Swadhyay movement across Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and now across the world has also created new sacred groves. We heard of sacred groves, which was my third case of Bhil tribe in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh. Sacred groves are spread across India, but Swadhyay Parivar has built new sacred groves, especially in Gujarat, in every district of Gujarat. So these 3 communities, as they have taken care of their natural flora and fauna, their environmental resources, they are not saying that we are environmentalists. They are not saying we are fighting climate change. They are not saying that we are fighting for loss of biodiversity. They are saying we are simply practicing our dharma. Bishnois said that Guru Jamboji practiced Bishnoi dharma. So whoever joins Bishnoi dharma has to follow 29 rules. Swadhyay Parivar says that we are simply bhaktas. We are practicing our bhakti. If any byproduct happens on the environment, that is just a byproduct. Our aim is to simply express our devotion to Krishna or to universal divinity or Almighty. So those ideas of dharma that are shown by, as I showed that in the previous slide of Pramod Parajuli and Vaitman Pandey, are actually practiced by especially these 3 communities that I researched in my own little research that I published last 10 years back. Next, please. Next. There's slight delay here, tech delay. Next, after this. All right. Now, this is my second last slide, and after that, there's just one more slide. So, also I quote here Professor Anne Gold, a very senior anthropologist from Syracuse University, and what she said is very interesting also. She did her longitudinal research for decades in a small village in Ajmer district, Rajasthan, my home state also. And what she said is very interesting. And she's quoting from a so-called illiterate villager, but look at the wisdom that an illiterate villager of India has, that human behaviors are irrevocably interwoven with the natural environment's condition. The deterioration of one implies and involves the other. So like we heard in the morning also, that environmental disorder is not just in the environment, but in the mind. It starts with a mental virus, as we heard also. Similarly, Marriott and Inden, Appa Durai, and my PhD advisor, Frederick Smith, also said something similar, that in Indian traditions especially, or non-Western traditions at large, including Taoism, Confucianism, and Shinto, and so others, Buddhism, of course, that difference between mind and body is of degree in Asian tradition, in non-Western traditions. Mind-body is a continuum spectrum. Culture and nature are continuum spectrum. There are no watertight compartments between nature or culture, no watertight compartment between mind and body. It's a continuous spectrum. That is what we see, that what happens to mind happens in the environment. What happens in the environment happens in the mind. That kind of a continuum spectrum we're talking about, and I'm quoting them also here. So what is moral becomes ecological, what is ecological becomes dharmic, and dharmic, of course, covers all these realms, as we saw in the previous slide. And finally, my last slide. So I'm well within my time, madam. This is last slide, please. All right. This is that first book which I was quoting from. So in which what we can do to take care of our environmental problems. If we can learn the dharma of nature, what nature does to us, the philanthropic qualities of a tree, for example. If humans can learn, if dharma of humans can be inspired from dharma of nature, we don't have to become environmentalist. Eco-dharma will happen as a byproduct, is what I showed in my first book also. With those humble words, I take my place, and I also want to share with you, thank you. I also want to share with you, I consider myself a student of Professor Kusum Jain, who was teaching us a lesson on Jainism in 2006. So I feel very humbled to be in this panel. Professor Paranjpe also one of the inspiration that I followed over the years. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pankaj Jain, and for highlighting one of the most important elements of Dharma tradition, that is sharing. And he rightly pointed out that even during the times of crisis, our government shared the vaccine with other countries, other people. That really shows how we feel that we are all one family, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. And I think this is so deeply ingrained in our tradition, in Dharma tradition, that you need not study Dharma or Dhamma for practicing it. I just share, because you talked about it, I share just one incident. During this pandemic, when all the laborers was moving, they were on their foot, they were going to their own village, and there was so much chaos everywhere, and people just didn't know what to do, and it came such a sudden, in such a sudden way, that one day I saw on TV that there's some people are moving, and all the laborers are going, and they don't have anything to eat, anything to, even it was May, June, and that was the first wave, and it was so hot down there. So with my son, I decided to go and see, do whatever I could do. And so we took some edibles like fruits and chappals, whatever we could collect, because the shops were it was locked down, shops were all shut. And it taught me such a big lesson that day. I want to share this with you. And that shows how strong our tradition of sharing is. We gave some fruits to, there was a group, and we gave to them, some bananas were there. And a lady comes and says, okay, give us just this much. There are people coming after us. Keep for them. I couldn't believe. We are the people who have so much in our houses, in our homes, and still wanted to collect more for the emergency. And they were in really emergency. They didn't know what they are going to eat in the evening. And she was telling me, don't give me all. There are people who are coming after us. There is a group coming. Now she had the chappal which was almost gone. And I said, you take this. And she said, I have at least this. This will last for two more days or 3 days. You can give it to people who don't have anything. I tell you, no teaching could give me this kind of insight into human life as she did. And not only she, so many people. And I found that it is not about having money or not, having resources or not. It is how we think about it. It's the attitude. It's the mental framework. And these people, they taught us, and you know how it impacts. Late in the night, during, around 1 in the morning, my son comes to me and tells me, thank you for taking me to this trip today. I learned so much. Now this shows how deeply this sharing tradition is ingrained in our culture, in our Dhamma tradition. And thank you for highlighting this. And now I would like to invite Professor Sunita Singh Gupta ji, who is currently a professor at the Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi. She was Dean from May 2017, August 2020. She joined the Faculty of Management Studies as a professor in 2005. Prior to this, she was an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, for 10 years. With 30 years of teaching and research experience, Dr. Singh Sengupta has lectured in the USA, UK, and France, and presented over 100 research papers at international and national conferences. Thank you so much for being part of this conference, and please.
At the outset, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Professor Sunaina Singh, Vice Chancellor of Nalanda University, for providing me the opportunity. Being a resident of Bihar, Patna, Nalanda University always resided in my heart, no matter wherever I was there. And I very fondly used to say, Nalanda fir banega, Takshila fir banega. I remember in 2002, from December 4 to 8, I was conducting an international conference at IIM Calcutta, where Sri Manthani from Suzlon Foundation, she was presenting the case study of Suzlon Foundation, and that led my journey of integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. In 2005, I moved to FMS, being initiated by Swami Ranganathananji Maharaj at Belur Math, with a vision to spread Indian culture philosophy into management. Being trained as a management professor, have been working with Vedic and Sanskrit scholars and trying to integrate it into management studies, because what we are following right now is Western management. India has to come up with its own management models. So I've been working exclusively in the area of management, and I'm very much blessed to be part of this August gathering, because currently I'm doing an ICSSR sponsored research project on Vedic foundations of Indian management, where respected Sri S.R. Bhatti is here, Professor Bala is here, and I can see many more known faces. So I have to deliver 9 different volumes on that theme. So I just wanted to convey my gratitude for this opportunity. I was mentored by late Professor S.K. Chakravarti at IIM Calcutta, who started Management Center at Human Values. And I'll be talking about corporate Abhyuday model, integrating dharma and karma in CSR. When I saw the mail to send the abstract, this was level 5, theme 5, which talks about dharmic traditions in CSR. And then I thought, let me present to this. Next slide, please. So the backdrop of the study is, we'll talk about corporate prosperity, Abhyuday model, based on pravriti and nivriti. I remember Professor Ramnath Jha referred Abhyuday word, and I felt very happy that set the ball rolling. And he also referred pravriti and nivriti. Against this backdrop, the paper will, I think I'll open it's difficult for me to see. Okay, so against this backdrop, this paper will initiate discussion on how the organizations can attain prosperity, Abhyuday, through incorporating pravriti, social action, and nivriti, inward contemplation, into their managerial practices. Nivriti may be operationalized by promoting swadharma, duty orientation, combined with professional character, acharya. The day a person joins an organization, a very simple example, he is more concerned about his or her entitlements. The duty orientation, swadharma, which Indian culture emphasized, goes back to the back seat. So we are more right-driven, time is right, that we have to reverse it back and be more duty orientation. Next slide, please. So towards corporate prosperity, Abhyuday through spirituality. For more than 2 decades, I have been working in the area of integrating spirituality and organizational leadership in general, and Vedic foundations of Indian management in particular. So how can we integrate ancient Indian wisdom into modern management practices? Can the organizations develop their structure and policies based on the concept of Abhyuday, corroborating ancient Indian practices? How to implement the Abhyuday model at micro level? Organizations can attain prosperity, Abhyuday, through incorporating pravriti, social action, and nivriti, inward contemplation, into their managerial practices. Nivriti may be operationalized by promoting swadharma, duty orientation, combined with professional character, that is acharya. So the architecture of corporate Abhyuday. Next slide, please. Sorry about this. If I go there, it's easy for me. Okay. Or I can sit there. Okay, the architecture of corporate Abhyuday. It talks about how do we integrate, It means an industrialist by dint of sheer hard work attains immense wealth and glory and is like a lion amongst people. Only the weak say that you get wealth by luck. So, O Hanuman, negate fatalism, rise to occasion, work to your capacity. There is nothing bad if you attain success after successively trials. So this is the architecture of corporate Abhyuday. Next slide, please. So the architectural design of a spiritually synergistic organizational culture entails 3 main concerns. The synchronization between individuals' ethics and organizational ethics, the interplay of values and skills, the alignment of structure and spirituality, that is the structure and processes. Next slide, please. So, perfection is attained when a person is devoted to his own duty and finds pleasure and job satisfaction. Professor Lee highlighted the importance of mind. Our scripture says, Manam Trayate, protect your mind. It talks from the very beginning, and the whole Indian philosophy is to create a strong mind, and strong strategy comes from strong mind. Swasva Kamani Abhirate, and when work is according to one's nature, aptitude. Swabhavinyam, so that's what Brihadaranyaka Upanishad talks about. Further, it is said in Bhagavad Gita that the highest perfection in work is attained by one whose reason is unfettered. So we need to create a pure mind. A pure mind gives the purity and perfection. Unfettered intellect, unattached and free, who has conquered himself and his forsaken desires. So this is what it talks about, and the famous line, asango aham, asango aham, asango aham, puna, puna. This is what we need to talk about. We need to give our best but not get cling to the chair. And that is the need of the hour, and that gives the best. Next slide, please. What should be the gravitational force of enlightened corporate citizenship? If the goal of life is to attain artha and kama through dharma to attain moksha, that is the Purushartha theory, then the managerial process and business actions need to promote the spirit of the practice of Swadharma. What is my dharma? In stakeholder management, which is missing, and that is the dharma and karma integration in CSR. Adoption of the approach based on Lokam Sangra for bringing prosperity for the citizens of the organizational community, which is very much required, and rhythm to emphasize the law of divine justice. So, rhythm needs to have its proper place in organizational structure and practices. So, how do we move towards corporate prosperity? Next slide. It has the spiritual and ethical wheels. Only through spiritual and ethical wheels, corporate prosperity can be attained. So, Nivriti and Pravriti for corporate prosperity, please. Can the organizations develop their structure and policy based on the concept of Abhyuday, corroborating ancient Indian practices? Next. How to implement Abhyuday model at micro level? Next. And can we integrate spiritual discipline with business practices to realize Sarva Bhute Hite Ratha, welfare and good of all creatures, and how to put Rita, moral order, into practice? Next. So, integrating dharma and karma in CSR. A widely quoted CSR definition by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development states that corporate social responsibility is the continuing commitment by business to behave ethically and contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society at large. So, organizations are viewed as legitimate and an integral part of society, but essentially it should create wealth for the society through the right means of action. Sarva Loka Hitam in the Bhagavad Gita refer to the well-being of stakeholders. This means on ethical and social responsibility, system must be fundamental and functional in all business undertakings. The success and failures of any CSR initiative can be attributed to leadership. Therefore, the organizational leadership needs to set example to the people or followers, as whatever the leader does, the people will follow, and whatever standards or example the leader sets, people in general will follow. Next slide, please. So, the law of karma, cause and effect, we have very significant portion of methodology from Indian philosophy on cause and effect is also highly relevant for CSR, as it is expected to motivate the business people to carry out their responsibilities and duties to serve humanity. This ancient Hindu philosophy implies that the present nature of an individual's life, effect, or organization is determined by their antecedents, actions, that's the cause. In the context of CSR, organizations should not only be interested in their own welfare, but also the welfare of all stakeholders and society. Dharma promotes the concept of Nishkam Karma, a perspective and action and decision making that emphasizes performing one's deed without attachment to the fruits thereof, and where both the action and the fruits are offered to the divine. I recommend my students while teaching at FMS that read Ashtavakra Gita, a beautiful conversation amongst Raja Janak and Rishi Ashtavakra, which promotes this nishkam karma and this passion, which promotes that how to cultivate a mind which is asango aham. In the CSR context, the societal contribution must not have with any expectation in return, but rather as a duty need to be done to the society. Next slide, please. So this is the model of corporate Abhyuday, which I created while I was a Homi Bhava fellow working on developing intrapsychic health insights from Indian Tantra system and working on Hindu and Buddhist Tantra system, and where I talk about corporate scandals and scams and how can the corporate attain Abhyuday, and this is the model where I talk about how it should be rooted in Rita and how it can promote self-control, de-egotism and sadhana mindset. So sadhana mindset is at the crux of everything to attain prosperity. Next slide, please. So the paradigm shift is next. Social behavior from Vyavaharik Vyaktitva to Paramarthik Vyaktitva. Compassion, love and truth, and pandemic has shown us perception work as a means to work as an end. Next slide, please. Managerial practices focus on Loka Sangram and principles of Samanvay. So this is how we can create a evolved workplace from bounded soul to faith type, ever free soul, which I have been repeatedly telling, asango aham. So how can we move to low to high dimension? Next slide, please. This is level 5 integral leadership style, which I developed and empirically tested and validated based on Sri Aurobindo's writing on level of consciousness and Bhagavad Gita Sthit Prajna, which I say leadership is a transcendence of mind. From sensual leader, one goes and becomes integral leader. An integral leadership based on cheerful state of mind, a calm, composed state of intellect and wisdom. Sthit Prajna. Next slide, please. So implementing corporate Abhyuday model, please, towards the evolved workplace. Synchronization between individual ethics and organizational ethics. Next slide. The interplay of values and skills. This is how we can implement it, and the alignment of structure and spirituality. Please, next slide. So enlightened corporate citizenship, please keep on moving. So practice of Swadharma and stakeholder management, adoption of the approach based of Lokam Sangra for bringing prosperity for the citizens of the organizational community, and rhythm to emphasize the law of divine justice. Next slide, please, quickly. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry about the, the time, that chaos that I created. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita ji, for a very rich presentation, though the time was really short for this kind of presentation. But thanks for highlighting that business is not all about profit making, but it's about Abhyuday, the real well-being of the society as well as the individual. Now I would like to invite Professor Makrand Paranjape, who is Professor of English at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is the former Director of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. His recent books include Swami Vivekanand, Hinduism and India's Road to Modernity. And the very interesting book, I would say, The Death and Afterlife of Mahatma Gandhi. It should be an interesting reading. You are welcome for this.
Thank you, Madam. I have one little graphic, if you can show it. So before I begin, I wanted to express my words of not just thanks and gratitude as has been customary, but of congratulations, not just to Ram Madhavji, whom many of us consider a visionary. The India Foundation is about 11 years old, 11, 12, but its impact has been more than almost any other Indian foundation in the realm the realm not only of strategy, governance, policy, but also in the realm of ideas. And therefore, I want to also thank and congratulate the directors of the India Foundation who are present. Lalita Kumara Mangalamji, my senior from college. She read economics, I read English, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, who has just left for a moment, and the entire India Foundation family, and also, of course, the Dharma Dhamma conference series, which was inaugurated at Sanchi. I was present. I'm a repeat offender. I must thank Professor Bhatt for conceiving or helping to conceive these conferences, planning them, and his team of colleagues from philosophy. And I'm also extremely proud today to be standing in this magnificent auditorium. I was in Nalanda University a couple of years ago before the lockdown. I'm a member of their academic council. And there were some buildings, but they were still far from completion. So despite Corona, the very dynamic Vice Chancellor, Professor Sunaina Singh, has accomplished this feat. I congratulate her, and I think that I saw the Lotus Pond as well. This is going to be a magnificent campus, and the credit should go to her. Please give her a big hand. And we are old friends and colleagues. We go back to Hyderabad. She was in Osmania University, and I was at the University of Hyderabad. So it's great to be here. It's a privilege to be here, and my learned panel has made my task easy. This diagram will sum up what I'm trying to say. My paper is actually called Corona and Consciousness, End of the Anthropocene. I mean, if not the end, then the upending of the Anthropocene. And I think the comments made by several people before me are kind of setting up what I want to say. But I was just reflecting on this conference itself. And I think there are three kinds of presentations that we were privileged to hear. One was people who are very important because they are the vice presidents of a country, major country, ministers, or the chief minister of the state, ambassadors, ministers from other states. A very high impact type of, presences, I would say, people who carry a lot of weight and influence. And then we had a very rich, should I say, feast of ideas. Many very interesting ideas came up also. But I think for me, the most important of the presentations which were those which had some insight to them. And because I'm talking about consciousness, you see, and my fundamental question to Ram Madhavji and to everyone is that if you want a new world order post-corona, can you have it without a new kind of consciousness? Now, if you want a consciousness revolution, what are its felicity conditions? And certainly, a very important prerequisite for any consciousness revolution, including a cognition revolution which happened to Homo sapiens some 40,000 years ago, prehistory, because we don't have a history of that time really. So this cognition revolution separated us from other ape-like creatures. Homo erectus is 2 million years old, but there are people such as Yuval Harari, who say that Homo sapiens will not last for another 1,000 years. And there's a reason for that. If you go to the end of the 1600s, when the East India Company began, in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, For students of literature, it was a great period of literature, English literature with Shakespeare, Marlowe, and others. But the entire population of England was about 6 million. The population of Bhutan is 700,000. And one neighborhood in Delhi has 6 million people, almost. There are 25 million people in Delhi itself. So this is the problem with the Anthropocene. The human species, we call it speciesism, if you don't want to use the word Anthropocene. So speciesism is threatening to destroy life as we know it on Earth. But if you look at the cosmos for a moment, that's the outermost layer, you can also call it the world of the gods. But the Milky Way, which is our own galaxy, is, it's a pretty big place if you follow such things, the Milky Way. And it's supposed to have 4 arms, okay? But the Milky Way is about 100,000 light years across. 100,000 light years. So the speed of light, right? 300,000 kilometers in 1 second is the speed of light. So the Milky Way is spread so far across that it will take 100,000 light years. Now, how many suns are there in the Milky Way? There are 100 billion suns or stars in the Milky Way. So how many planets will there be? Several more billion. Which is the galaxy nearest to the Milky Way? In fact, the Earth, our sun, is on a small arm of the Milky Way. There are 4 arms. There are 2 big arms and there are 2 small arms. One of the small arms of the Milky Way is called Orion, and that is where our own solar system is. And the nearest galaxy to ours is called the Andromeda. How many stars does that have? Andromeda is about 2.3 million light years away, and it has 8 trillion stars. So the point I'm trying to simply make is that human beings who consider themselves so important are actually quite dispensable in the total scheme of things. And so if we don't get our act together, I think we'll be extinct and we'll have nobody else to blame but ourselves. And this can be a trigger for a consciousness revolution. This is my basic thesis. Now, if you want a new world order, I think Ram Madhavji mentioned the Asian Relations Conference, 1946. It was a brainchild of Jawaharlal Nehru. And he mentioned Gandhiji at the end of that conference, who spoke about religion, which is not something that Nehru respected very much, because, we don't like Gandhiji today. We blame him for everything. But one thing we should give him credit for is to save India from communism. If there had been no Gandhi, India would have become a communist country, because the intelligentsia of that time was convinced that that was the future of humanity. So please think about this. I invite you to think about this. But the reason I brought up the Asian Relations Conference, its importance was that they wanted to conceive of a socialist or communist world order after the World War. Second World War ended in 1945, and the armistice was signed, and they said we should never have a war like this. So, as I said, a consciousness revolution needs a trigger, which is a big crisis. Corona is a crisis. But how many people died? Only 5 million, 5 million is a large number, but it's like 1 in 1400. But in the World War, 6 million Jews alone died. And they were slaughtered in very efficient killing machines. And so that brings us to the crisis of rationality, which Adorno and Horkheimer wrote about in the Dialectic of Enlightenment. Please read that book, because they believed that what could be more irrational than a rational and efficient killing machine? So please keep that in mind, okay? I'm talking about the triggers of a consciousness revolution. But let's go back to the story of the Asian Relations Conference for a moment. So the trigger of that was the Second World War. But at least 40 years prior to that, people after the First World War had been thinking about a new world order. And this was called millennium thinking, and there were affective communities spread across the world. And a key thinker in that was Sri Aurobindo, or Aurobindo Ghosh. That was his name, 1872 to 1950. He has been mentioned a couple of times. And someone on the first day actually spoke about essays on the Gita. But the two crucial texts to look at are the human cycle and the ideal of human unity. And the quotation from Geoffrey Long was from Essays on the Gita on War. But the key text is War and Self-Determination. War and self-determination, because he said war begins in the minds of man. So unless you can change the mind of man, and of course woman, though men are more responsible for wars than women, I believe, unless you change the minds of man, you can't end war. And this is absolutely true. But the United Nations succeeded. We haven't had a world war so far. So if the trigger is sufficiently, should I say, dangerous, threatening to human survival, we might just change, okay? But this thinking that we need to go back to is that thinking of these affective communities. There were theosophists, there were vegetarians, there were pacifists like Tolstoy, who were in dialogue with each other. James Cousins came to India, Annie Besant came to India, and there were people of color. Nico Slate has a book called Colored Cosmopolitanism. People in China, people in Japan, people in Brazil, all over the world they had an aspiration for a new world. Then what is different? What has changed today? What do we have today which we didn't have at the end of the First World War or the end of the Second World War? What we have today is technology. And nobody in this conference has really seriously considered technology. Geeta ji mentioned it briefly today. And I also want to thank her for bringing in education, but from a different angle. We don't need schooling, we need deschooling. You see, for a new consciousness, the mind has to be liberated from the shackles of the past. And this is where, though the tradition has the answers, as my friend Professor Jha was saying, the answers are there, but the answers are not in the form of words and images. This is a yogic civilization, not just dharmic. The answers have to be realized by a change in our own consciousness, not just by purveying ideas. There are thousands of ideas. And as I said, 100-year-old ideas are pretty good today, even today, because Sri Aurobindo talked about the human cycle, the phases in which humanity evolves, and also the ideal of human unity, where he spoke about world government, where he spoke about cooperation, even sacrifice, and a new world order based not on power but on wisdom. So these ideas are there and they're very powerful. But the root of them is consciousness. And what has changed today is technology. Because technology is forcing us to change, you know. And unfortunately, there is the flip side of technology, which Ram Madhavji mentioned. We're running out of time, I guess. Or you're looking at your watch, so it's a signal to me. But one of the things that I do not want to violate is the dharma of this conference, which is stuck to time, which is a great thing. Because in India, we never do that, you know. So I'll end in a couple of minutes. So he talked about drones who would start killing people. You don't know who's responsible. There is the Pegasus scandal. We don't know if we are under surveillance as we speak. So surveillance and social media is all about mind control. It triggers the reward as well as the punishment centers in the brain, and it instrumentalizes human intelligence. So one of the things we have to learn post-pandemic is don't get instrumentalized. I want to tell the young people who are happy joiners in ideological, should I say, movements. If you want to release the creative capacity which is innate in you, you can't be a joiner. You have to be somebody who is a skeptic. You can, of course, join, which is where I want to end actually by joining. I want to end not by skepticism but by joining. But because in the triple gem you say, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami, and those with some RSS affiliations also say Kali Yuge Sanghe Shakti. You can change the word order in Sanskrit. It remains the same. So you can say Kali Yuge Sanghe Shakti, or you can say Sanghe Kali Yuge Shakti. So without working together, we cannot transform consciousness, global consciousness, but it has to start with ourselves. But I don't find anybody who's deeply interested in transforming their own consciousness. I find very few such people, because we are all outward going, and we are not interested in the inner work that is required. And so the only thing I want to say to end my presentation is some of the ideas we heard today about the virus in the brain. This is what technology does. It makes you act in a collective fashion and do really terrible things. It can invade your mind. It can clone very destructive ideas, But if you look at these diagrams, we have flipped the order, the Reta, the cosmic order, where technology was a part of culture, which was a part of humanity, which was a part of the natural order, which was a part of the cosmic order. Now, see what we have done. The cosmic is in fact the innermost circle, which almost nobody cares about. And all these viruses were zoonotic. They jumped from animals to human beings. They didn't harm the animals, they harmed us. And what are we doing? We're social distancing, and we are cutting ourselves from our environment. But every child knows, or the mother of every child knows, that immunity can't come that way. Immunity can only come when you play in the dirt and all the dhatus become your friends, because all these elements are a part of you. Stardust has made you, right? So you're not apart from this universe. So humanity going farther and farther and farther away from nature is going to be suicidal, obviously. So immunity can't come that way. Immunity can only come from playing in the mud and soil and the biome in your gut. That is going to build your immunity. So immunity is built by 3 or 4 things, food, rest, and positive stress. If you have negative stress, your immunity will be finished. And of course, meditation. So these are some of the thoughts that we need to think about when we want to build a new global order. The opportunities are there because the nature of power has changed. The US exiting from Afghanistan is a signal that the old style policing of the world is no longer going to be possible for any country. But there'll be new forms. You can do it through technology. You can do it through economics. You can starve a country of resources. You can freeze their assets. There are hundreds of ways of controlling other countries and other people. And the last thought I want to leave you with is, what is the future of the free world itself? Because there are 2 models available to us. And there are authoritarian models and there are models which nurture freedom. But we see an interesting interpenetration. The free countries are getting more authoritarian in a variety of ways, and they have much more mind control going on, subtly or overtly. It's all about narrative wars, right? And the authoritarian countries are, of course, thirsting, as it were, for more freedom. And I think for the new consciousness to be born, as I was saying, we have to start with ourselves. It can't be imposed from above. It can't be a coercive mechanism through which everybody can be, enlightened suddenly. But frankly, for humanity, if we want to survive by 1,000 years, even if we want to survive 100 years, I think we have to try to transform ourselves and also work together in a spirit of cooperation and interchange to work for a better planetary existence not only for human beings, but for all species. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Paranjape, for drawing our attention to the significance of consciousness, which is one of the most important element in changing or building a new world order. I don't know if we can have question answers. 4 questions? Okay. So we can have 4 questions now from the floor. Okay, you can begin with this. And I'll request you to be brief in your questions so that we can have better answers.
Hello, my question is to Makran sir. Sir, you have talked about technology, artificial intelligence. These days in Facebook and Twitter, what is happening is when someone clicks a particular type of post, from next day onwards, people get that thing only as suggestions. Okay, that is creating some psychological bias in people. So how we can tackle this, sir?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good question. This is what we heard earlier. It's a mental virus of sorts which is induced through technology, right? And mind control is happening all the time. Everyone wants to control your mind. The advertisers want to do it, the politicians want to do it. Most of these are paid trends. Twitter is full of paid trends. And so this nexus, this asuric nexus between profit and power has brought us to the brink of self-destruction. This is very clear. You can only do it by having a very alive and critical mind, and that can only come through deconditioning. You see, we have forgotten how to observe things. We don't observe anything. We don't look at a flower, a plant, because we only look at everything from the view of the past. If you read Krishnamurti, it's a good trigger to make you think, because he talks about conditioning, and most of our responses are conditioned responses. So you have to move from conditioned responses to being conscious. So consciousness is precisely the ability to break the compulsive habits of both the body and mind. You will see your mind is also moving in a compulsive cycle and repetitive cycle, as is your body. The way you eat, the way you sleep, everything in your body is going according to compulsive cycles. And partly meditation is to break those compulsions so that you induce an awareness. Stop whatever you're doing and drop in. Stop and drop in. This is a phrase that Deepak Chopra uses, but it's very wonderful, like a Satori or like a Zen thing. Whatever it is you're doing, stop for a moment and say, who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? What do I want? Things like that. Where am I going? And actually, that's what I'm saying. The last thing I want to say to you is that this is a time not of individual yoga. This is a time of collective yoga, of collective bhakti, and of collective karma. It's not a time that you lock yourself somewhere for 21 days, no, that's also good for you. You do a Vipassana course, fantastic, but it's not about individual salvation. Our whole consciousness permeates throughout the cosmos today. I mean, what you're thinking, actually I know if I'm aware. And we are on the brink of that kind of consciousness and cognitive revolution, for which the drones, not just the mechanical drone, but human drones who just keep repeating things, that is a block for the emergence of that consciousness. The repetitive, drones that we hear all around us. You go to any conference, you will not find a single new idea. Hardly. I exaggerate in order to make a point. Thank you.
Okay. Can we do one thing? We can have 2-3 questions and club them, and then maybe our speakers can respond to that. You can.
Sir, my question to Makarand Paranjape sir, that Sir, you told that the more than 4 million people were slaughtered by the slaughter machine, and during the involvement of the human consciousness. And you told that in during the virus pandemic, approximately that number of people were died. So, isn't it true that the deadly virus, which is also a creation of artificial intelligence by human beings?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah. My question is for Sunita ji because we have been talking about bringing in dharma in CSR. Now, if we analyze the current models and the definitions and dimensions which are there in CSR, all are from the Western school of thought and philosophy. When can we have an Indian CSR model? Apart from the existing two, we have the ethical and the SETIs which are not working. When can we have an Indian CSR model with the dharmic principles there and which is applied and not just a design and diagram in paper that we can give in to the corporates to incorporate immediately? The reason being is this pandemic has shown us the reality of life, and if we see their contribution in CSR, I believe most corporates have done, but I believe they only do it, to rank good in government index rather than from consciousness. So because the numbers and figures are still very poor. Thank you.
My question is to all the panelists. I think when it comes to the question of transformation, because at the end of the day we are looking at moving towards a more holistic, a more peaceful society, one question that comes is what is the locus of our effort? Is it, well, on the one hand, we've heard about consciousness, which is working on the individual, and assuming that change comes about through, I don't know, 1 billion human beings being transformed internally. But then there are also ideologies which say that change comes through transforming structures, and that the individuals are in a sense determined, their future is determined by the kind of structures you have. So there seems to be this constant dichotomy between where does one focus when change is our objective, positive change. Does one transform the structures like Professor Jain was talking about, systems? Or is it consciousness, or is it a reciprocal process which requires addressing change at both levels?
Yes, my question is to Professor Paranjape. So actually, you spoke about the consciousness theory. So the model which you are looking for, is it a kind of Western model like existentialists are talking about, Sartre and others they are talking about, or a kind of phenomenological model given by Husserl, or a kind of model given by Vedanta? Is a kind of model, like if you go by Western analysis or Western parameters, the value systems are different and the kind of problems are different, thinking process are different. And when it comes to the analysis of Indian situations, the model is totally different. And again, we have a different kinds of model, idealistic model, realistic model, the materialistic model. So what exactly the kind of model you are looking for to have a kind of new world order we are talking about? So that is what my question is.
Hi, Makran sir.
Thank you.
My question to you is, my name is Samrid. My question to you is, we were talking about how the world is already worried about the surveillance happening on us through our phones. We talk about something and the next day we see the ads and how they're hearing. What are your views on the world is already, and some technology companies already talking about the next era is the metaverse environment of the universe, how it won't be just the phone you're carrying, but eventually we'll get into that whole thing of like how the Facebook is creating metaverse and many other companies are creating. The currency is becoming the cryptocurrency is becoming the currency of the even the national central reserves. Central banks are at a threat, and even sometime back we heard that even Mr. Kamal Hassan is coming
Hello.
up with his own avatar on
Yes,
metaverse.
I guess there will be many more questions, and the kind of questions which are coming up, it seems we need another session for answering these questions. So, I can request Sunita ji to answer as briefly as you can, please.
Yeah. So thank you for raising this question. And one of my paper is uploaded on academia.edu, Ancient Indian Corporate Entities, Structure and Functioning. In 2002, Professor Khanna from Penn State University compared it with an American corporate. Shreni at that time, the first reference comes in Rig Veda, 800 BC, which has all the qualities. Now, second example is, India was always a welfare-oriented state. Gupta dynasty, Maurya dynasty, whichever you pick up, you will find a model there. All of us observed Chanakya, the episode, but if you try to gaze through it, what was the Indian model in that? You will get an answer to that. Madam talked about sharing. So this giving and sharing is the Indian model. You know, all of us, feed the cows, the crows, the dogs. This giving, sharing. So, which was always in our culture. Recent example, still old, is Tatas, which have been into it. So, I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
I think we'll just go down so that everyone gets a chance to say a few words. I'll respond to the couple of queries addressed to me. The point is that reason was seen as an answer to religion, because religion was closing the minds of people in Europe. That was the way. As we've seen, dharma is not religion, but we are talking about the Western context. So the point that I was trying to make is that this consciousness revolution has to go beyond religion and reason, because the current rationality that we have is not only not very beneficial, but it's not even very rational at one level. And that's why I gave the example of the gas chambers and the killing machines that the Nazis invented. But their root goes back to the guillotine, which was a killing machine invented by Europe during the Enlightenment. So please see this trajectory of efficient killing, and now drones will do the job, okay? And if you've seen X-Men, you can get into Charles Xavier's head, and then you can kill all the mutants, or you can kill all the humans. There may be a time when that will happen, when Facebook will give you some command and you'll do, which brings me to the second point, which is about, we're all become, as Donna Haraway says, we're already cyborgs, in some ways, because half our brains are in our gadgets. Ram Madhavji can't be separated from his phone or in our computers, because our memories are there, the way we connect to the world is there. So we have become trans persons, meta persons already. But this is where, as I was trying to say, that we have reached a stage, I believe, where an idea, once it is uttered or once it is written, is immediately available everywhere, which addresses the question that you raised. It's not one or the other. It's not, did matter come first or did consciousness come first? That's chicken and egg. Do you change a structure to create a new human being, or do you create a new human being to change the structure? It's simultaneous. It's a dimensional shift. This is how I would put it to you. You have to move from one dimension to another dimension, because in that same dimension you can't change things beyond a point. So it's a dimensional change. Which brings me to Dr. Sahu's question, But you see, I've never been fascinated by some of the models you've talked about. I've been interested in our ancient thought, in the Vedas, which are far more complex. In fact, Vedanta to me is a restriction of the Vedic idea. Though Shankara calls Vedanta, in a sense, because it's philosophically accessible, he looks at it as higher. But I think if you read The Secret of the Veda by Sri Aurobindo, you will see that the Vedic corpus has notions of consciousness, which you'll see in the Upanishads also every now and then. But they can't be captured in the kind of language we are using. They require a different idiom. Language at its limits brings us to silence and other modes of communication. But I'm also, I must say, I'm completely, should I say, deeply skeptical of this East versus West type of thing, which is very popular today. Islam versus something. Swami Vijnananand talked about conversion. You convert them. You open your doors and say, Dharma, Dhamma welcomes everyone. See how many people will come your way. You think everyone likes to be coerced by dogma? No. You open your doors. Conversion works both ways. It's not only they convert us, so to speak. If you have better ideas, they will follow you. Yoga without conquest has, within quotes, conquered the world. Why? You're showing them something better. So today you can't fool people. You can't say somebody said this 700 years ago, so it's right. No. They'll try it out. If it doesn't work, you have to show how your system works better. It's more liberating. It enhances human potential. It contributes to human flourishing. And everybody is welcome. So this is the way I think we have to build a world, not in terms of polarities and oppositions and constantly creating divisions, which may be okay, not okay, but understandable in the realm of politics, but not in the realm of ideas or in the realm of culture, because culture works through osmosis. You can't keep othering everybody. You may hate a culture, but the food is so nice, you like that food. What do? Everybody likes pizza. They criticize the West, but they love the West for its gadgetry and all. So this is all, it's very nice to say, all these things, East versus West. There's only one humanity, only one human culture, and it has always been the case, and best practices are constantly circulating through a process of replication and imitation and influence. So you produce the best practices and people will follow you automatically. Thank you very much.
Professor Pankaj Jain, would you like to respond to any of the questions?
I'll just add that what Max Weber had talked about the charisma and routinization of charisma. So I am creating polarity, sorry, sir, that when Christ came up with new ideas, he was crucified, right? And things have happened of that nature, especially in that part of the world. But in our part of the world, when Buddha and Mahavira came with new ideas, they were also accepted into the great pantheon. So I think to speak of the bottom-up or top-down dichotomy that you were asking, I think when a new idea comes, I think it challenges the established hierarchies, and over time, the real transformation, I think, really happens from heart to heart, home to home, hut to hut, house to house. But that to happen, I think somebody has to come up with a really great new idea that can be liberating for everybody. And that happens easier, I think, in the non-Western world. Sorry to, again, harp on the dichotomy. In the Western world, it has been very difficult. Probably with the democratization of technology, it may happen much more easier now. But we are yet to see, because the technology still does not have its heart in the right place. It's still the empire of hegemony and empire of profit making and all that. So that's all. Thank you.
Professor Lee.
Thank you. For me, attending a conference in India is like visiting my hometown for holiday. So thank you for all of you. you don't have any questions to me. Because now I'm enjoying my holidays in India, so I don't like any kind of serious questions. Just I don't like. And anyway, to my mind, there is only two kinds of consciousness. One is egoless conscious, and the other one is conscious with ego. And Professor said that conscious revolution. Okay, it is a very good idea. So if we need and we have to do conscious revolution, it means that transition from ego, conscious with ego, to egoless consciousness. I think it is our conscious revolution. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee, and thanks to all the panelists for those wonderful presentations. And I think, as I said, there are so many questions that we can have another session going on. And I will request, if you have any other questions, they will be there for lunch, so you can catch them and ask your questions there. And I'm sure they will be very happy to respond to your questions. I would like to thank India Foundation and Nalanda University for organizing this wonderful conference for so many years. We are, this is the sixth one, and the good thing about this time is that we have at the center two ladies who are managing everything. Okay, so Nari Shakti ko naman. और मैं हमेशा ही बात कहती हूँ, पुरुषों को नाराज़ करने के लिए नहीं, पर एक बहुत सुंदर सी चीज़ है जो किसी ने कही कि मेरे गम आपको मिले होते, आपने होश खो दिए होते. स्त्रियों की तरफ से आप लोगों को कहा जा रहा है, मेरे गम आपको मिले होते, आपने होश खो दिए होते, मेरा दम है कि मुस्कुराती हूँ मैं, आप होते तो रो दिए होते. So this is the strength we all, womanhood has, and we are seeing how it works. Now we are towards the end of this session, and we have talked about consciousness, we have talked about the crisis we have faced and may be facing later on. But one thing I'll just request all of you, it's a famous proverb from a place where this whole crisis came. Keep a green tree alive in your heart. Keep a green tree alive in your heart. Maybe a singing bird will return back. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for that enlightening discussion. Before we finally conclude, I request our Honorable Chairperson, Professor Kusum Jain ji, to kindly felicitate our guest. I would request our volunteers to please come with the token of appreciation. First to Professor Jio Leong Lee. Can we please have a huge round of applause while we... next to Professor Sunita Singh Sengupta ji. Jaldi, jaldi. And next to Professor Pankaj Jain ji. And to our final speaker for this session, to Professor Makarand Paranjape ji. I would like to request Director, India Foundation, Madam Lalita Kumar Mangalam ji, to please come and felicitate the chair. Friends, there are a couple of announcements. Now we'll break for